Moving on, let's talk about the energy flow in an ecosystem. So how does energy flow in an ecosystem? In most ecosystems, energy ultimately comes from the sun. Light energy is captured by plants through photosynthesis. It is then converted to chemical energy stored in food and body materials in plants. The energy is transferred to animals when the animals feed on the plants. It is further transferred when the animals are eaten by other animals. In other words, energy flow in the form of food in an ecosystem. Energy is lost from organisms through excretion, egestion, and in the form of uneaten body parts when organisms die. Energy is also lost in the form of heat during respiration. Therefore, a continual input of energy from the sun is essential to keep an ecosystem stable. To illustrate the flow of energy in an ecosystem, we can construct food chains and food webs. But what are food chains and food webs? Both can be constructed to represent the feeding relationship among organisms. So how are they different from each other? First, the food chain. A food chain shows the sequence of organisms in a particular feeding relationship. It also shows the direction of energy and material flow from one organism to another. Organisms may act as producers, consumers, or decomposers, depending on their role in energy flow. Here we have a food chain, and the grass is the producer. Most food chain starts with producers. They are organisms that can make their own food, meaning they are autotrophs. Most of them are photosynthetic, such as plants, algae, and photosynthetic bacteria. They capture light energy and convert it into chemical energy, which is stored in organic compounds. Secondly, let's talk about consumers. It is shown here as the rabbit. Organisms that depend on other organisms for food are heterotrophs. Consumers are heterotrophs. They feed on other living organisms. By feeding, they transfer energy along food chains in the form of food. Depending on their positions in the food chain, consumers are classified into primary consumers, which feed on producers, secondary consumers, which feed on primary consumers, tertiary consumers, which feed on secondary consumers. In the food chain here, the rows of organisms are shown in brackets. The grass is the producer, rabbits being the primary consumer, fox being the secondary consumer, and the tiger being the tertiary consumer. And organisms may play different roles in different food chains. For example, we are primary consumers when we eat vegetables, but we become secondary or tertiary consumers when we eat meat. Besides producers and consumers, they are also decomposers. Decomposers are saprophytes. They feed on dead, non-living organic matter. Many fungi and bacteria are decomposers. When they feed on dead bodies, feces, or other excretory products of producers or consumers, they break down organic matter into inorganic nutrients. Some inorganic nutrients are absorbed by plants and enter the food chain again. Therefore, decomposers are important in material cycling. However, they are usually not shown in food chains. After talking about the food chain, let's talk about the food web. Most animals feed on more than one type of organisms. At the same time, a particular type of organism can be eaten by more than one type of organism. Therefore, the feeding relationships in an ecosystem are often complicated. We can connect related food chains together to form a food web. It shows all the possible feeding relationships among selected organisms in an ecosystem. Now, let's talk about the trophic levels and energy flow. A trophic level is a level in a food chain. It is the feeding level of an organism depending on what it feeds on, and by what organism it is eaten. Energy flows from lower to higher trophic levels. Now, let's look at an example. only a very small proportion of energy, usually less than 10%, is transferred from one trophic level to the next. Therefore, less energy is available to organisms at a higher trophic level. So how is energy lost when it is transferred from one trophic level to another? There are 4 ways for energy to get lost: uneaten body materials, digested materials, excretory products, and respiration. First, energy loss can be from uneaten body materials. Some organisms are able to escape from predators all throughout their lives. Chemical energy stored in the uneaten body material is not passed to higher trophic levels and is therefore lost from the food chain. Energy can also be lost from digested material. When an organism is eaten by another organism at a higher trophic level, usually a large proportion of it is indigestible and unabsorbed. For example, cellulose in plants and bones and hair in animals are hardly digested. The indigestible and unabsorbed material is passed out as feces, meaning digested. Therefore, not all energy stored in eaten organisms can be transferred to organisms at the next trophic level. Energy is also lost through the excretory products, for example, carbon dioxide and urea of organisms. The energy inside the excretory products is not transferred to organisms at higher trophic levels. Respiration also causes further energy loss. All organisms carry out respiration. Much of the chemical energy in the food eaten is released as heat or used to support various body functions. The energy lost along trophic levels actually refers to the energy that is not transferred to the next trophic level. Uneaten dead bodies, digested material, and excretory products are broken down by decomposers. The chemical energy stored in such material is used by the decomposers. Due to the great loss of energy along a food chain rarely consists of more than 5 trophic levels. With fewer trophic levels, less energy is lost. This explains why a shorter food chain can support more consumers at higher trophic levels than a longer food chain. To extrapolate more information from a food chain, we can look towards ecological pyramids. So what are ecological pyramids? Ecological pyramids are graphical representations showing the amount of energy flowing within an ecosystem. Pyramid of numbers and pyramid of biomass are 2 different types of ecological pyramids. First, let's talk about the pyramid of numbers. Pyramid of numbers are bar diagrams showing the number of organisms at each trophic level. The area of each bar is proportional to the number of organisms at that trophic level. The base of a pyramid of numbers represents the number of producers. A typical pyramid of numbers has a broad base. The size of the bars decrease up the trophic levels. This is because less and less energy is available to organisms at higher trophic levels. And a predator is usually larger in body size than its prey, and hence requires more energy to maintain its life. Therefore, the number of organisms that can be supported at a higher trophic level is usually smaller. In some cases, we can see an inverted pyramid of numbers. Let's look at an example. In a food chain starting with a tree, the tree can support a large number of herbivores, for example caterpillars. So, one oak tree, because of its large mass, can support 10,000 caterpillars. The producer has a smaller number than the primary consumer, and therefore this ecological pyramid is known as an inverted ecological pyramid of numbers. Secondly, let's talk about the pyramid of biomass. A better way to understand energy flow in a food chain is to measure the biomass of organisms, and thus to prevent the previous example of an inverted ecological pyramid. Biomass is the total dry mass of organisms at each trophic level in a given unit area at a particular point of time. So what is a pyramid of biomass? A bar diagram showing the biomass of all trophic levels in a food chain is called a pyramid of biomass. The amount of energy stored in an organism is usually proportional to the amount of living material in its body. Therefore, changes in the amount of energy flowing through the trophic levels can be represented by change in the total biomass of organisms at different trophic levels. The example presents as a normal pyramid if a pyramid of biomass is used. It shows that the producer have the greatest amount of energy. There is a reduction in amount of energy from producers to consumers. The amount of energy reaching the top level is small. Let's look at an inverted pyramid of biomass. A pyramid of biomass is usually upright, but it may also become inverted when organisms at a lower trophic level have a much higher reproduction rate than the organism at a higher trophic level. The pyramid shows an example of an inverted pyramid of biomass that occurs at the bottom of the chain in aquatic ecosystems. Photosynthetic phytoplankton, in this case is the producer, is eaten by zooplankton, which is the primary consumer. At a particular point of time, the total biomass of phytoplanktons is small. However, the phytoplankton reproduces very rapidly, so that its small biomass can support the larger biomass of the zooplankton. Ecological pyramids are useful tools for scientists to show what's happening in an ecosystem. However, they do have limitations. First, the trophic level of an organism, especially carnivores, may vary with the type of food eaten. Some organisms may also change their diets as they grow. Thus, it is often difficult to assign them to the correct trophic level. Secondly, the energy flow to the decomposers is not considered. This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Click on the tab to watch the next part of the video series.